Our interview this morning is with Seth Cotharn. Seth was born in Somerville, Texas in October of 1938. He served in the United States Army from February of 1964 until February of 1967. His highest rank attained was E5 Sergeant. This interview is conducted at Burleson, Texas on Friday, September the 24th, 2010. Present in the room along with Seth and myself, I'm Dale Dexheimer. I am not related to Seth in any way. And also in the room are Milton Gibson and Gary Burton, who are our videographers. This interview is done for the Veterans History Project at the Library of Congress and also for Operation Remember, City of Burleson, Texas. And with that little introduction, Seth, we'll let you tell us your story of when you were in the Army, sir.
Okay. I consider myself a volunteer, although I volunteered because I didn't want to get drafted. I had had a deferment while I was in college. I also had a deferment for 2 years when I was in seminary here at Southwestern Seminary in Fort Worth. But in '63, I dropped out of the seminary, moved to Austin, enrolled in the University of Texas Law School, and dropped out before the first exam. Withdrew passing, so I could go back if I wanted to. I have no intention. But when I dropped out, I realized that at the age of 25 and the Vietnam situation going hot and heavy, I was subject to being drafted, and I didn't want to be drafted. So I went to the Army recruiter, and I told him, I wanted to join the Army, and I wanted to go to OCS. And he said, okay, we'll set you up with an interview with a panel of 3 officers. He did. I went before the panel. They interviewed me. 2 of the officers on the panel were graduates of Texas A&M. I don't know that had anything to do with it, but I was not accepted to Army OCS. And I said, well, okay, the Army's not the only game in town. I'll go talk to the Navy. So I went to the Navy recruiter, and they accepted me, and they said, the only problem is with your eyesight, you will be a Supply Corps officer. And I thought, I don't want to spend a career handing out towels. So I went back to the Army recruiter, and I said, what else do you have? And he said, oh, you're a college graduate. Why don't you go to intelligence school or military intelligence? And I said, ooh, that sounds good. What is it? And he said, oh, I don't know. It's secret. I'll have to set you up an interview. I said, okay, do it. So I was living in Austin. I had to go to San Antonio for an interview with a special agent. And he told me about, you'd be wearing civilian clothes, you'd be living in an apartment, you'd be doing all these good things, and I thought, hey, that sounds good to me. It just so happened it was the day President Kennedy was shot, because on my way back as I was driving into Austin, I had the radio on in the car, and they indicated that President Kennedy had been shot. Well, I just went into orbit because I thought these news people are just making things up. Anyway, as it wound up, in February, I did other things, and finally in February, I went down to San Antonio and raised my hand and swore to defend the Constitution of the United States. And they said, okay, you're going into military intelligence, so you have to take the Army language aptitude test. I said, fine with me. I had had 2 years of Spanish in high school. I had minored in Greek in college. I'd studied Greek and Hebrew at seminary. Well, the Army language aptitude test is a dummy language. So I made an outstanding score. And so then, along with a busload of other troops, we got on the bus and headed for Fort Polk, Louisiana. And I tell people that my first day in the Army, I was AWOL, because not just me, the whole busload, but we missed a bus connection in Lake Charles, Louisiana, so we were late getting to Fort Polk. And I thought, you know, they'd say, well, you guys have been up all day and you're tired, so, you know, hit the rack and we'll do all this stuff in the morning. Well, they didn't. They said, okay, we got all this paperwork for you to fill out. And one of the things they said, oh, you're going into military intelligence. You have to take the Army language aptitude test. And I said, I just took it. And they said, it's not on your record. You have to take it. I said, give me the test. So I took it and I maxed it. And that's what went on my record. I didn't know at that time that it was going to come back to haunt me, I thought. But anyway, I was very concerned about basic training because I had sat in a chair in school until I was 25 years old. And I thought, you know, I'd heard all kinds of horror tales about basic training, and I thought, it'll kill me. Well, it turned out it really wasn't bad at all. The most interesting part, or the part that I enjoyed most about basic training, was the firing range. And I made sharpshooter with the M14, and I was amazed at the number of kids. Of course, I was 25 years old. I had been on my own, doing my own thing for several years, and here I was with a bunch of 18-year-olds, and the Army's rule was, you don't have to think. We will think for you, and we will tell you what to do. So physically, basic training was not a problem, but emotionally, it just tore me up. In fact, there were a couple of times on weekends, I'd be sitting on the steps of the barracks, looking out at the pine trees toward East Texas, wondering how far it was and how far I could get before I got caught. But I made it through basic training. It was in February, North Fort Polk. They had just reopened it for basic training, and it was cold as the dickens. And during basic training, several guys developed meningitis. And in order to prevent the spread of the disease, every night we would have to open all the windows to the barracks, turn off the heat, and we nearly froze our butts off. But got through all that. I had an experience during basic training. I developed heel splints, and I had to go on light duty for, I guess, a week. And of course, the word that was always going around is, if you miss too much, you will be recycled. And I was determined I was not going to be recycled. But I was sitting in the supply room one day, typing a letter back home, and everybody else was out training. Somebody came in and needed sheets or pillowcases or something, so I went to the back to get that, and when I came back up, the field first sergeant, Sergeant Manus, was sitting at the desk where the typewriter was with my letter in it, and I was describing this sergeant who had part of his teeth missing, and he was just something else. And I thought, if he reads that letter, they'll just put me in a hole and nobody will ever find me. He obviously didn't read it because nothing ever happened. I weighed 124 pounds when I enlisted, which was 4 pounds over the minimum. During basic training, I gained up to 140 pounds. And I said it was because I ate potatoes 3 times a day. However they cooked them, I ate them. Just across the road from our barracks was a little snack shop, and I had the most insatiable craving for ice cream. I think I ate more ice cream than I've ever eaten in my life. One other thing about, well, 2 other things about basic training. I said I was puny. We had our grenade training, throwing the grenade. And the Army has a particular stance that you're supposed to take in order to throw this grenade. Well, I couldn't throw it that way. And I told them, I said, if you'll just leave me alone and let me throw it, I'll do the best I can. No, you've got to do it the Army way. Okay. So toward the end of basic training, we went out to throw a live grenade. So the sergeant and I got down in the pit, and I told him, I said, I can't throw this thing very far, but I'll do the best I can. He said, okay. So I pulled the pin, and I threw it with all my 125, 35 pounds, and he said, hit the dirt, it's going to be short. And it went out there, kaboom. Well, oh, so much for that. Basic training, I thoroughly enjoyed several years later. But, let's see. Oh, the other thing, we, toward the end of basic training, we marched out to go through the infiltration course. And as soon as we got out there, a sergeant said, okay, everybody that has KP tomorrow, get back on the truck. You're going back to the company area. Well, I had KP the next day, so I get on the truck. I go back to the company area. We get off the truck, and this, I won't use my language, this lieutenant comes out and he says, what are you all doing back here? You're supposed to be at the infiltration course. We said, the sergeant brought us back. He said, get back on the truck. You're going out to the infiltration course. Well, by the time we got back out there, it was dark. And the safety officer said, you didn't go through on the dry run, so you're not going through the real infiltration course. But we don't want the rest of your colleagues to know that you didn't go through it. So I want you to get down and roll around in the dirt and get dirty. And I said, I don't mind that, because they're doing my laundry. But I said, I am not going to get my weapon dirty, because I don't want to have to clean it. Everything went fine until, I think, about the next to the last day of basic training. We were sitting up in the bleachers having some kind of lecture. And a truck pulls up, and a sergeant comes out, and he says, okay, everybody didn't go through the infiltration course, get on the truck. I thought, okay, here we go again. So we go out to get on the truck, and there was a big husky black soldier in the group that the sergeant knew, and he said, what are you doing here? And the guy said, well, I didn't go through the infiltration course. He says, your record says you did. Get back in the bleacher. So we get back in the bleacher, and I never did go through the infiltration course. I thought, boy, this Army is really in good shape. Okay, then from there, I went to intelligence school at Fort Holabird outside of Maryland, which was a fantastic experience. We had really interesting lectures and exercises, even had a typing course taught by a Mrs. Klecka. So we called it Clacking with Klecka. Manual typewriters. And she said, these typewriters are your weapons. Don't let anybody sabotage your weapons. Because, you know, as a as an intelligence analyst, we would be writing reports and whatnot, and that was our weapon. I'll never forget the lady. She drove, I think it was either a 47 or a 49 Packard that was absolutely in mint condition. I slobbered every time I saw it. She was the 1938 Speed Champion typist of the United States. She could just burn up a typewriter. Anyway, it was good. About halfway through at Fort Holabird, we get our orders to our next assignment. And mine was to go to Defense Language Institute West Coast Branch at Monterey, California. And I just had a fit. I went to the major, who was our class monitor, and I said, "Major, I joined the Army because I have been in school all my life, and I don't want 6 more months of school. There are people in my class who wanted to be in military intelligence in order to go to language school." I said, "Send them to language school and send me back to Texas." He said, "I'm sorry, the orders have been cut. You're going to language school." And I said, "Okay, they can make me go, but they can't make me learn it." And he said, "That's true, but the people that flunk out of language school are on the first boat to Vietnam." And I said, "Hey, language school might not be bad." And it was the first, when I got to Monterey, it was the first time since enlisting in the Army that I was treated like a human being. The first morning that I went down to go through the mess line, the guy actually asked me how I wanted my eggs cooked. And I almost didn't know what to tell him. But it was fantastic. All of my instructors in German were native-born German, with one exception. And we went into class the first day, and they explained to us in English what we would be doing, how we would be doing it, the whole procedure. And they said, "This is the last English you will hear in these classes for 6 months." So for 8 hours a day, 5 days a week for 6 months, we did German. And they had the most fantastic way of teaching language. You know, I had studied other languages, but the way they did it was just absolutely unbelievable. And it was fun. So then I tell people the Army really screwed up. They had spent all this money teaching me German for 6 months, and they sent me to Germany. I expected I would go to Thailand or, any place in the world where they'd never even heard of German. But I went to Nuremberg, 511th Military Intelligence Company under 66th Military Intelligence Group out of Stuttgart. And it was just wonderful. I got there, I think, about the 1st of May. So Memorial Day in 1964 would have been our first 3-day weekend in Germany. But I had left and I was just I'm not sure that I'd even made PFC by that time. I guess I had. But I was single, PFC, having to live in the barracks. And one, I guess, Friday night, I don't remember the day, but I took the streetcar to downtown Nuremberg to the Army Hotel to play the slot machines and have some drinks and whatnot. And I knew I had to be back by midnight. No problem. I left the hotel in plenty of time to get back to the company area. But on the way back, I got talking got to talking German with a German fella, and I missed my stop, which meant I had to go all the way to the end, wait for the streetcar to turn around for them to take their break and come back. And when I got back, it was too late. So, I had to wake up the duty agent to get into the secure compound. And the next morning I was put on report. And for the first 3-day weekend in Germany, I was on restriction to the barracks. Every hour, on the hour between 8 and 5, I had to go to the orderly room and sign in. So, it was fun. Not too long after I'd gotten there, the warrant officer called me in, the payman called me in, and he said, okay, we're going to give you your civilian clothing allowance. Okay, I don't remember. It seemed like it was, I want to say $400, but that would be a lot of money back in '64 for PFC. But anyway, he said, here's the money. He said, now, what kind of car are you going to buy? And I said, Mr. Crasson, this is for my civilian clothes. He said, I've been in this Army too long to know that you're not going to spend it on clothes. You're going to buy a car. I said, well, I have picked out a new '64 Volkswagen. He said, that's a good choice. All right. Duty was fun. It wasn't difficult. We had our monthly alerts when we would have to, we would get a call from group headquarters and say, okay, we have an alert. Everybody has to pack up and go out to a bivouac area and blah, blah, blah. Well, one day I was the duty agent when we got the call. So I went through the checklist procedure, and everybody, the radio jeep went out first, and when they got in position, they radioed back, and they said whatever they said, and I didn't know anything about operating a radio. So I said something like, well, what do you want me to do? Come out and hold your hand? And about that time, a major burst through the door, and he chewed me up one side and down the other and said, that's for official use only, and you don't talk like that on an Army radio, blah, blah, blah. And I said, okay, whatever you say. But I spent the last about 6 months of my almost 2 years in Germany in a little town called Weiden on the Czech border, living in a big 3-story house with a housekeeper. I had a private room. We drove back and forth to 7th Army training facility in Grafenwehr, and we worked in civilian clothes in the training command headquarters. And I worked for a captain who was a reserve officer captain. And there's a difference between a reserve officer captain and a regular Army captain. The reserve officer captain insisted, even though I worked in civilian clothes and he worked in civilian clothes, I had to address him as captain. Okay, that's fine. One day I was going from the 2nd floor down to the 1st floor to talk to the sergeant major about something, and I went 2 stairs at a time down and around the corner and just ran chest to chest with a 2-star general. And I felt like that kid, that private in, what was the movie? Patton. When Patton walked around the corner and this GI is sleeping on the floor, and he kicks him and wakes him up, and he says, "Soldier, what are you doing?" And the soldier said, "I'm sleeping." And he said, "Well, go back to sleep. You're the only one around here that knows what he's doing." So anyway, The general was not upset. I had no idea what was going to happen. I just apologized, and he went his way, and I went my way. The difference between a reserve officer and a regular Army officer, I worked for the reserve officer captain, but I worked with a regular Army captain who I think was a graduate of the Citadel. And I called him by his first name. When it was time for me to come back to the States, that captain and his wife drove me from Nuremberg to Stuttgart to catch the plane. And I think I had my first snails. I think I'd probably had several beers before I had the snails, and really wasn't maybe that familiar with what I was eating. But I got back. I had shipped my car back to New York, so I went from Fort Dix, New Jersey, up to New York, picked up my car, and drove back to Texas. My military experiences were interesting, I think probably somewhat unusual, and I appreciated them after the fact. I didn't really appreciate everything that was going on when it was happening, but I was happy to do what I did, and it was good. I think that's all I can remember at the moment.
Okay, some questions. I assume you were single all the time?
Yes, yes.
Okay.
In fact, I did have a girlfriend, long-distance girlfriend, down in the Munich area, and occasionally when I could take leave, I would go down and spend a weekend or 2 or 3 days in Garmisch-Partenkirchen, in the ski capital area of Germany, but I never went skiing. I preferred to stay in the lodge where it was warm and hot buttered rum.
You had some pretty abrupt changes in your career.
Yes.
You were going to the seminary in Fort Worth.
Yes.
And then you enrolled at UT Austin.
Law school.
6th Street atmosphere and all of that.
Mm-hmm.
You went from conservative Southwest Baptist Seminary to UT Austin.
Yep.
Okay.
And then went from there to the U.S. Army. Where
you had some big changes.
I did. I really did.
You mentioned that when you took the Army language test,
yes,
it was a dummy language.
It was an artificial language.
Okay. It was not Army language for dummies.
No.
It was something that someone had.
It was a made up language.
Yes. Okay.
Yeah.
And with your training in Greek,
Spanish, Greek, and Hebrew.
Yes.
Yeah.
This was all pretty much. There was a pattern.
Very easy. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
When you went through basic, they had designated you were going to be Army intelligence.
Oh yes.
Which to me, this is something special. But
and they reacted that way. Oh, you're going into military intelligence. Actually, a friend of mine would say in parentheses, and actually it was counterintelligence. And he said, you need to be in counterintelligence because you're against everything that's intelligent. But it was every time I would go to some place and they would see that I was going to military intelligence, they would always say, oh, you're going to military intelligence. And I thought, Yeah.
They had that reaction.
They did.
But then actually when you went through basic, they didn't show you any favoritism or...
Oh, no.
You went through the same basic that everybody else went
Right.
through. Okay. You went to this typing school with Ms. Clickety-Clack or whoever she was. How long was the school?
The intelligence school was 16 weeks.
I'm sorry, just the typing school.
It was a part of the...
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
How fast
course,
could you type when you got out?
I had taken, I believe, 2 years of typing in high school, and I don't know, 80 or 90 words a minute.
Pretty quick.
Yeah.
Okay.
And you didn't submit any errors to Mrs. Klacka. Clacking with Klacka. If you made an error, you redid it because you couldn't erase it. Of course, this was before computers. You couldn't erase it and redo it because she could hold it up to the light and tell that you had made a mistake. She was a jewel. And I even had, I want to say I had at least one full colonel in my class. And that colonel respected Mrs. Klacka like he would respect a 4-star general. When Mrs. Klacka said, do this or don't do that, the colonel snapped too. It was very interesting.
When you got to Germany, after you'd gone through the language school at Monterey,
Mm-hmm.
you're on a streetcar speaking German to the German.
Right.
Was it the same language? It was,
Pretty much so.
Okay.
The German that we had in language school was what they called High German. I mean, it was proper. In Nuremberg, they speak that dialect. I had a classmate of mine in the language school who just came that close to flunking out. But when he got sent to Germany, he got sent to Schwäbisch Gmünd, and they have a very peculiar dialect that even the real Germans have difficulty in learning and speaking. This kid, call him a kid, who almost flunked out of language school, picked up on that dialect. He and his wife lived in an apartment, and he learned it. It was just unbelievable how fluent he got in German. Oh, I forgot to mention one thing. One of the things that we did is probably illegal now, but one of the things that we did was to intercept mail from a German to an American GI. And we had Germans working for us as translators. And there was one guy that was just a riot. Most of the Germans that you would talk to who were of World War II age would say, I didn't fight the Americans, I fought on the Eastern Front against the Russians. Well, this one guy said, I know why we lost the the war, because I was the only one fighting on the Western Front against the Americans. It was fun.
You're an intelligence or a counterintelligence, maybe not agent, but that's the unit you're with.
Analyst.
Analyst.
Yeah.
Okay. You've mentioned that a number of times, but what did you actually do? Who were you snooping on? The Russians or?
We were primarily snooping on Germans who were trying to make, I I guess what we would call illegal contact with American soldiers. The title sounds very exotic. It really wasn't. The work was pretty routine. It was another thing I forgot. When we were dealing with, if we wanted to call in a German to interview, we had cover names. And the first time I went for one of those interviews, I forgot what my cover name was because I hadn't used it. But yeah, I don't think any great harm was done. Probably one of the most interesting things, I worked very closely with a senior master sergeant who had been in Germany for years, and he was a liaison person between the U.S. Army and the German military, police, and other folks there in the Nuremberg area. And I got to work with him quite closely in visiting those people and dealing with those people. And it was quite interesting.
On your way back to the States, you stopped and had snails. Escargot?
Escargot, yes. I've never had them since, and I don't intend to.
Okay. Well, I thank you for your time. I just remember,
do we still have time?
Oh, yeah.
One other little interesting experience. Because I worked with this master sergeant who was the liaison man, we were having a I guess, Christmas party for, I don't know who all. But anyway, the group commander from Stuttgart was coming, and I was selected to be the colonel's driver. So I was to pick him up at the Army Hotel, bring him out to the party, have nothing to drink, and then take him back to the hotel, him and his wife. Fine, no problem. The streets in Germany can be confusing. They're kind of like the streets here. You never know from one minute to the next when there's going to be a detour, when there's going to be construction, and all this kind of stuff. Well, I knew how to get to the hotel and back to the company area. And between the time I picked the colonel up and took him back, they had put in a detour. There's a place in Nuremberg called the Frauentormauer, and it's the wall where the ladies hang out. And on the way back, this detour, and it wasn't my fault, the detour actually took me by that. And the colonel he'd had way too much to drink. And he was looking and he said, "Cotharn, I've never seen this part of Nuremberg." And I said, "No, sir, I haven't either." And I just kept right on driving. I finally got him back to the hotel and everything was cool.
Brings up one more question. Army Hotel. You stayed
Yes.
at Army Hotel. You escorted or drove the colonel down and back. What's an Army Hotel? Was it a hotel that had been commandeered? Did the Army build it from the ground up?
I'm sure it was a German hotel. Now this was in '64. So the Army, U.S. Army still had more authority than they do nowadays. But they had this big hotel, and it was probably a 6 or 7 story hotel. It had a small casino, and of course the bar and whatnot, and dignitaries would stay in that Army hotel. Just like when I would go down to the ski place, Berchtesgaden. The Army had hotels down there, and they provided ski lessons, and they controlled quite a bit of real estate in Germany at that time.
Well, good. Good interview. Thank you, sir. We appreciate your time, and we appreciate you.
My pleasure.
Your time that you were there defending us.
I enjoy reliving these experiences now.
Little sense of humor goes a long way, too.
Oh, yeah.
You bet.
Sure does.
Thank you, Seth.
Yes, sir.